Before we get into the exciting part of the story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Are you from a big city or a small town? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious, and I love hearing from everyone. Now, let's get to the story. It's about a young man named Marcus. But don't let his name fool you. Marcus wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd. He was just like everyone else, trying to get by and stay out of trouble. On any normal day, if you saw him, you probably wouldn't even notice him. He didn't wear fancy clothes or try to get attention. Marcus was quiet. He didn't ask for much. All he wanted was to live his life in peace. Marcus lived in a small neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other but nobody really stopped to check on the details. The people who lived there worked hard and did what they had to do to get through the day. Marcus, like many others, kept his head down and kept to himself. He didn't like to stand out. He didn't want people to stare at him. His life wasn't filled with big adventures or dramatic moments. He was just trying to survive in a world that sometimes didn't care about people like him. But you know how sometimes life can surprise you? How one small thing can completely change everything. That's exactly what happened to Marcus. It was a day like any other, but this day would be different. It would change his life forever. And it would change the life of someone else too. A woman with so much power and importance, a woman who nobody expected would cross paths with someone like Marcus. Her name was Judge Catherine Blackwell. You might think she sounds like someone who has everything figured out, someone who doesn't need anyone's help. And in a way, you'd be right. Judge Blackwell was well known in the city. People respected her for her smart mind, her tough decisions, and the way she always seemed so in control. She wore nice suits and walked with her head high. She was powerful, and everyone knew it. But on this day, something happened that nobody could have predicted. Something happened that would change the judge's life, and it would be because of a young man who had nothing but kindness in his heart. Marcus didn't know it yet, but that day was about to make him stand out in a way he never imagined. And Judge Blackwell, for the first time in a long while, would see the world in a completely different way. You might be wondering, how could Marcus, a simple young man, help someone so powerful? What could he do for someone who already had so much power and respect? Well, here's where the story gets interesting. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change the biggest things in the world. And that's exactly what Marcus was about to show. Let's go back to the morning when everything began. It was early, just like any other weekday. The sun was rising, casting soft yellow light across the streets. Marcus was walking to work at the local grocery store, where he spent most of his time stacking shelves and bagging groceries. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to pay the bills. He liked it. It was simple, and he didn't have to deal with too much. He liked being in the background, unnoticed, just getting by. But that morning was different. As Marcus walked down the sidewalk, he noticed something strange. A woman was standing by the door of the store. She looked out of place. Marcus could tell right away that she wasn't like everyone else who came in and out of the shop. She was well dressed, with a big coat and heels that clicked loudly on the sidewalk. Her hair was neat, and her face looked serious, almost tired. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. He was used to people coming in and out of the store, all kinds of people. But then he saw her face again. She looked nervous. Or maybe confused. She was standing there, her hand on her stomach, like she was about to collapse. Marcus stopped in his tracks. Something wasn't right. He watched her for a second, unsure of what to do. Should he keep walking? Was it really any of his business? But then he saw something that made him take a step forward. The woman looked around, like she was looking for someone, but no one was there. She seemed so alone, even though there were lots of people walking by. It was as if she didn't matter to them, like they didn't even notice her. And that made Marcus feel something he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he walked up to her. "Excuse me, are you okay?" he asked in a soft voice. His words weren't loud or demanding. He just wanted to make sure she was all right. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were wide with surprise. She hadn't expected someone to stop. She hadn't expected anyone to care. I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to stand up straighter, but Marcus could see that she wasn't fine at all. Her face was pale, and she was shaking a little. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked again, stepping a little closer. The woman took a deep breath. "I'm just tired. I need some air." Marcus didn't know why, but he felt like he had to help her. Maybe it was because of the way she looked lost and worried, or maybe it was just his natural instinct to be kind. But whatever the reason, Marcus wasn't going to just walk away. He gently helped her toward the store's door. "Come inside, get some water," Marcus said. "It's cold out here." The woman hesitated for a second, but then she nodded, clearly relieved that someone had noticed her. I'm Catherine," she said quietly, as they entered the store. "Nice to meet you, Catherine," Marcus said with a small smile. "I'm Marcus. Let me know if you need anything." And that's when Marcus realized that this was no ordinary woman. She didn't just look like she was in charge, she was in charge. As she sat down at a table, she pulled out a phone from her purse. Marcus didn't pay much attention to what she was doing, but he noticed she seemed important. Very important. The day went on. Catherine sat in the store for a while, drinking water and resting, but she didn't leave. She seemed lost in her thoughts, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Marcus went about his work, but every now and then, he'd glance at her. There was something about her that made him wonder what was going on. Who was she? What was she doing here? But Marcus didn't ask. He figured it wasn't his business. She was just another person in need, and that was enough for him. What Marcus didn't know was that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. A simple act of kindness, something he did without thinking, was about to connect him to a woman who could change everything. And soon, Marcus would find himself in the middle of a story that no one could have predicted. And so, on a regular, ordinary day, two people, one with the power to make decisions that affected thousands, and one just trying to survive, would meet. The world didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. And as you sit there reading, I know you're wondering what happens next. How could someone like Marcus, who had so little, end up changing the life of someone like Catherine? Well, just wait. The real story is only just beginning. Marcus didn't ask for much in life. He wasn't the kind of person who dreamed of being rich or famous. All he wanted was a job he could count on, a place to live, and a little bit of peace. That was enough for him. Marcus worked at a local grocery store. Every day was pretty much the same. He woke up early in the morning, made his way to work, and spent the day doing what needed to be done. He'd stock the shelves, clean the floors, and help customers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and that's all Marcus cared about. He didn't mind being in the background. He wasn't looking for attention. In fact, he liked being invisible. But one cold morning, something unexpected happened. It wasn't like any other day. Everything changed in a flash. The door to the store opened with a loud jingle, and in walked a woman. She wasn't just any woman, though. She was clearly different from the usual customers. She was wearing a fancy suit, and her hair was done up neatly, like she had just come from some important meeting. She looked like someone who had it all together, someone who didn't need anything from anyone. But as Marcus looked at her, something didn't seem right. Her face was pale, and she looked scared. She didn't walk with the confidence that most people who wore expensive clothes had. Instead, she stumbled as she walked into the store, her hand resting on her stomach like she was in pain. People in the store glanced at her for a second, then quickly turned away. They were too busy with their own things to care. Some of them whispered, staring at her for just a moment before returning to their shopping. But Marcus noticed something that no one else did. He noticed the fear in her eyes. There was something about her that seemed different. She looked like someone who needed help, not someone who had everything under control. The woman looked around, almost as if she didn't know where she was. Her eyes were wide and full of fear, and she looked like she was about to faint. Some of the people in the store just kept walking by. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to make a scene. They just wanted to finish their shopping and go home. Marcus watched them, but he couldn't understand how they could ignore her like that. He felt a pull inside him. Something inside of him told him he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He couldn't just watch this woman, clearly struggling, and pretend he didn't see it. So, without thinking twice, Marcus walked over to her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman looked up at him, her face full of surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to care enough to ask. She seemed stunned by his question. For a moment, she just stared at him, like she couldn't believe he was talking to her. She shook her head a little, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I'm fine," she said weakly. I need some air." But Marcus didn't believe her. He could see how unsteady she was. She didn't look fine. He could tell that something was wrong, and he wasn't about to let her walk out of there alone. "Maybe you should sit down for a moment," Marcus suggested gently. He could tell she wasn't feeling well, and she definitely didn't look strong enough to be walking around. The woman hesitated for a moment, but then nodded weakly. She took a seat on the bench by the door, still holding her stomach like something was hurting. Marcus could see she was uncomfortable, but she didn't seem to want to admit it. "Thank you," she said softly, still looking a little shaken. Marcus didn't know what to do next. He didn't know why she was so upset or what was going on. But something in his gut told him that she needed help. He decided to help her the best way he knew how, by just being there for her. "Do you want me to get you some water?" he asked, his voice calm. "Maybe you just need a moment to breathe." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, please. I think I'll be okay if I just get some fresh air." Marcus stood up, taking a moment to look at her. He couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She looked so out of place, so vulnerable. It was strange to see someone like her so put together on the outside, struggling so much on the inside. Marcus had always believed that no matter how strong or important a person might seem, they could still have moments when they needed help. And today, this woman needed help. He gently helped her to her feet, supporting her as she wobbled slightly. She didn't seem to have the strength to stand on her own. "I'll help you get some air," Marcus said, his voice kind and steady. With his help, she slowly made her way out the door. The cold air hit them both, but it seemed to help a little. Marcus stood with her outside, watching her breathe in deeply, her shoulders rising and falling with each breath. She seemed to calm down a little, but her face still held that look of fear. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus smiled, feeling good about helping her. But he still had no idea who she was. Why was she so upset? Why did she look so terrified? Who was this woman? As the woman sat on the bench outside, Marcus took a moment to look at her more closely. She was still holding her stomach, and Marcus thought that maybe she was pregnant. The way she had been standing earlier made him think she was feeling sick because of the baby. Maybe she was having some trouble. But even so, Marcus couldn't help but feel that there was more to her story than just that. He didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he just stood there quietly with her, offering his presence and his support without saying much. Finally, after a few minutes, the woman seemed to calm down. She stopped holding her stomach as tightly, and her breathing became steadier. She stood up slowly and straightened her back. "I'm okay now," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Thank you for your help. I think I just needed a break." Marcus nodded. No problem. I'm just glad you're feeling better. The woman smiled at him faintly, still looking a little shaken but much calmer than before. You're kind, she said. Not many people would have stopped to help me. I really appreciate it. Marcus just shrugged. It's no big deal. I just saw you needed some help, that's all. The woman gave him a long, thoughtful look. For a second, Marcus thought she might say something more, but then she simply nodded again. Well, thank you. You've been very kind. With that, she turned to walk away, but before she left, she paused and turned back to Marcus. I don't know who you are, she said, but you've done something today that most people would have ignored. You're a good person. Marcus blinked, surprised by her words. He wasn't used to being called a good person. He was just trying to get through his day like everyone else. Thank you, he said quietly, a little embarrassed. As the woman walked away, Marcus stood there for a few moments, watching her go. He still didn't know who she was, but something about her stuck with him. She was important, he could tell. She had a presence about her that made people notice. But today, for some reason, she had been vulnerable. She had needed help, and Marcus had stepped up. Little did he know, this moment this simple act of kindness was going to set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman he had just helped was not just anyone. She was Judge Catherine Blackwell, one of the most powerful and respected judges in the entire city. She made big decisions that affected people's lives. She held a position of power that most people could only dream of. But today, she wasn't a judge. Today, she was just another person in need of help. And Marcus had been the one to offer it. And that, my friend, was the moment that would start the journey of a lifetime. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Marcus. After helping Judge Catherine Blackwell outside the grocery store, he felt like his world had shifted just a little. He had done something simple, but something about helping her seemed important, even though he couldn't quite understand why. There was just something about her. Marcus didn't know much about the world of judges or lawyers. He didn't even know that much about the law. His life was simple, filled with small routines. But what he did know was that when someone needed help, you didn't turn your back. So, that's exactly what he did when Judge Blackwell had stumbled into the store. He helped her, and for a few moments, he felt like he had done something good. As they stepped outside into the cold air, Marcus helped her find a bench to sit on. He didn't know why she looked so pale or why she was shaking, but he could tell she wasn't feeling well. He stayed with her, quietly waiting, until she seemed to calm down. Then, he made sure she was okay to walk before he helped her to a nearby cab. When they got to her house, he helped her inside and made sure she was comfortable. She thanked him again, but Marcus didn't need the thanks. He was just happy that she was safe. She had looked so lost and alone back in the store, and now, with her sitting comfortably in her home, it felt like the right thing to do. Judge Blackwell told Marcus she'd be fine and that she'd rest for the day. She told him not to worry, but Marcus couldn't help but feel concerned. He had helped her when she needed it, and now he felt a sense of responsibility to make sure she really was okay. Still, he didn't ask any questions. He didn't push her to talk about what had happened. It wasn't his place to know her secrets, and he wasn't the type to pry. He simply made sure she had what she needed before he left. Before he left, she gave him a warm smile. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly. "You're a good person. I appreciate your kindness today." Marcus just nodded, not really knowing what to say. "It's nothing. I'm just glad I could help." Then, without saying anything else, he left her house and went back to his own. That night, as he sat in front of his television to unwind after a long day, he couldn't stop thinking about Judge Blackwell. Who was she? She seemed so different from the woman he had seen on the news, the woman people whispered about in the courthouse. He remembered seeing her face on the TV before, but now, she wasn't just a face on the screen. She was someone he had helped, a real person. The next day, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about her. It was like something inside him knew that this wasn't just a normal day. This was the start of something bigger, something he couldn't yet understand. Later that afternoon, as he was walking home from the store, he stopped by a newsstand to grab a drink. Without thinking, he picked up a newspaper, and there it was, staring him in the face. The headline read, "Judge Catherine Blackwell, the most powerful woman in the courtroom." Marcus stared at the headline. The woman he had helped, the one who had been so vulnerable in the store, was the same Judge Blackwell that everyone talked about. He couldn't believe it. He read the article carefully, trying to make sense of it all. The article described her as one of the most powerful people in the city. It said that she had won many high-profile cases and was respected by everyone in the legal world. It even mentioned how her decisions had changed the lives of so many people, and how her voice in the courtroom was like a force that couldn't be ignored. Marcus felt his heart race. He couldn't believe what he was reading. The woman he had helped, who seemed so fragile and scared, was the same woman whose name everyone knew. She was the judge who controlled the fate of many people. She had the power to send people to prison, to decide the future of entire families, and to change the course of history. But despite all of that power, she had come to him, a simple young man who worked at a grocery store, for help. It made Marcus think. He had always heard about powerful people and seen them on TV, but he had never realized that they could need help, too. Everyone seemed to think that people in power were invincible, but Judge Blackwell had shown him that even the strongest people could be vulnerable. As the days went by, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about her. He began to notice something strange. She started showing up at the grocery store where he worked. At first, it was just a few times, but eventually, it became more regular. She would come in, always alone, looking like she was just another person doing their shopping. She never made a big deal about it. She never talked about her cases or her work. She didn't ask for special treatment. She acted like a normal person, just like the rest of the customers. Marcus would always see her, and she would wave at him with a small smile. Every time she came into the store, they would talk for a little while, exchanging pleasantries or sharing funny stories about their day. Marcus didn't push her to talk about her work or her life as a judge. Instead, they just talked like old friends. They shared laughs, talked about the weather, or swapped stories about their lives. She had told him a little about her pregnancy, though she never went into much detail about why she had been so shaken up that day. It was like she didn't want to be Judge Blackwell anymore when she was around him. She didn't want to be the powerful woman who controlled the courtroom. She wanted to be Catherine, just another person who could laugh and have fun and feel like everything wasn't so heavy all the time. Sometimes, when Marcus was working late, she would sit on one of the benches in the store and talk with him. Those moments felt strange but comforting. She would never mention the legal cases she worked on, but she would talk about her day, about little things like her favorite books, or her experiences from childhood. It was clear that she wasn't the same woman who stood in the courtroom. She was a woman who, just like everyone else, needed to connect and be heard. Marcus started to understand something more deeply about her. Despite all the power and respect she had, she was still just a person. She had dreams, fears, and struggles just like anyone else. For some reason, she trusted him. She had opened up to him, even if it was only a little, and it made him feel important. Yet, Marcus still didn't understand the full picture. He didn't know why she had come to him for help that day or why she kept coming back. There was still so much he didn't know. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to ask her about it yet. But he had a feeling that everything was about to change. Something big was coming. He could sense it. The woman who had needed his help, the powerful judge who had seemed so distant, was now a part of his life. But how would their story unfold? Would she be the one to change his life, or would he somehow change hers? It was just another morning when everything changed for Marcus. He had no idea that the day would take a turn so unexpected, it would change his life forever. Marcus had been to court before, but never as part of something big. He had always seen the courthouse as a place where important decisions were made, where powerful people sat behind big desks and handed out decisions that affected others' lives. But today, he was standing in the back of a crowded courtroom, feeling out of place, his heart beating fast in his chest. He had only come to see a man from his neighborhood. Marcus didn't know him too well, but the man had always been nice to him when they crossed paths. The man had gotten in trouble before, and now he was in court facing a serious charge. It seemed like everyone had already decided that the man was guilty, but Marcus didn't believe that was true. He felt something deep inside him, a belief that the man deserved a second chance. But he knew he wasn't the one who could change the outcome. That was up to Judge Catherine Blackwell, the woman who had saved him when he helped her all those weeks ago. The courtroom was full of people, all waiting for Judge Blackwell to make her decision. She was a respected judge, known for her tough decisions. Everyone knew that whatever she decided would affect the man's future, and it could change the lives of his family and friends, too. The tension in the room was thick. Marcus could feel it in his stomach. The man's lawyer had done everything he could to fight for his client, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the case wasn't just about the law, it was about something more. He could see it in the man's eyes. There was a kind of desperation, a quiet plea for a chance to make things right. Judge Blackwell was sitting at the front of the room, her face serious as she looked over the evidence. The room had grown silent. Every eye was on her, waiting for the final word. Marcus tried not to think about his own nerves. He felt small, just one person among many, yet there was something inside him, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the judge would show mercy. He wanted to believe that not every mistake was unforgivable, that people deserved the chance to try again. The man in the chair, the one who had been accused of something terrible, deserved that chance too. Then, in a moment that caught everyone off guard, something unexpected happened. Judge Blackwell stood up from her chair, and for a moment, the room held its breath. She turned toward the jury and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Her words seemed to fill the room with power, but just as the crowd braced themselves for her decision, the judge did something no one expected. She turned away from the jury. Her eyes scanned the room, and her gaze locked on Marcus, who was standing quietly in the back. "Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Please come forward." The entire courtroom gasped. Everyone turned to look at Marcus, who felt his heart race and his legs freeze in place. What was happening? Why was she calling him? He had done nothing special. He was just a regular guy, no one important, just someone who had helped a woman in need a while ago. Why was he being called into the spotlight now? The judge's gaze never left Marcus as he slowly walked forward, his feet heavy with uncertainty. He felt all eyes on him, their curiosity sharp, their whispers growing louder as he stepped closer to the front of the room. When Marcus reached the front, the judge nodded for him to stand beside her. He did, unsure of what was happening. He felt like a deer caught in headlights, frozen, trying to understand what was going on. Then Judge Blackwell spoke again, her voice strong but kind. "I would like to explain something," she said, facing the courtroom. "This young man, Marcus, saved my life not too long ago. He never asked for anything in return. He simply helped me when I needed it most. In a world that often doesn't offer kindness, Marcus showed me what it means to care for someone else." The courtroom was silent. People stared at Marcus in shock. He felt the weight of their gazes, their curiosity, their disbelief. Was this really happening? Why was Judge Blackwell talking about him like this? She continued, her eyes scanning the room. "I've spent years in this job, making tough decisions. I've sent people to prison, I've seen people at their worst, and I've had to make decisions that I knew would change lives forever. But sometimes, it's easy to forget what really matters. Sometimes, it's easy to get lost in the rules and forget that every case, every decision, is about people, real people who have hopes, dreams, and the ability to change. Judge Blackwell paused and looked down at Marcus. Marcus showed me the truth of this. He reminded me that kindness can change a life. He didn't know who I was when he helped me. He didn't care that I was a judge, and he didn't care that I could have gotten him into trouble. He simply saw someone in need and did what he could to help. Marcus's heart was pounding in his chest. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't know why the judge was talking about him like this, but something in her words made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: important. Judge Blackwell turned to the jury, and the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And so, she continued, because of Marcus's kindness, I've made my decision. Sometimes, justice is about more than just the law. It's about humanity. This young man in front of me, the one who showed me what it means to care for another person, deserves a chance to rebuild his life. I am going to offer mercy, not just to him, but to the man standing trial today. His life isn't just about the crime he committed, it's about the chance to start over, to make a difference, just like Marcus did. The room erupted into gasps and murmurs. The decision had been made. The man Marcus had come to support, the man everyone thought was beyond help, was going to get a second chance. He wasn't going to prison. The judge had shown mercy because of Marcus's act of kindness. Marcus stood there, stunned, as the judge turned back to him. Her eyes softened, and she gave him a small smile. You've done something very important today, Marcus, she said softly, and you didn't even know it. The man who had been accused of a terrible crime stood up and looked at Marcus with gratitude in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but Marcus could tell that he was deeply moved. He owed his life to the kindness that Marcus had shown, not just to him, but to someone who had the power to change everything. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. He had gone from being a simple grocery store worker, helping a woman who needed it, to being at the center of a decision that had changed someone's future. He had never asked for any recognition, never wanted anyone to know what he had done. But somehow, by showing kindness when it mattered, he had reminded Judge Blackwell of something important: that sometimes the best decisions aren't made in the courtroom. Sometimes, the best decisions are made in our hearts. The moment Judge Blackwell finished speaking, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Everyone was trying to process what had just happened. Marcus could hardly believe it himself. He had never imagined that his simple act of kindness would lead to such an incredible change. The man who had been facing a life sentence, who had been judged by everyone for his past mistakes, was now given a second chance. It was a moment of true justice. Then, something unexpected happened. The courtroom, which had been so quiet before, suddenly erupted into applause. It wasn't just a few claps here and there, it was loud, it was powerful, and it was filled with a sense of surprise and relief. People who had never thought twice about Marcus were now clapping for him. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but in this moment, it didn't feel bad. It felt right. As the applause continued, Marcus looked around the room, and for the first time, he felt like he truly mattered. He wasn't just the boy from the grocery store anymore. He wasn't just the kid who helped a woman in need. He was someone who had made a difference in the world, someone who had changed the game, even if he hadn't meant to. The man who had been accused of a terrible crime stood up, his hands shaking as he wiped away tears. His eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other. No words were needed. The gratitude in the man's eyes was enough. He knew he owed his future to Marcus's kindness. The man had been given a second chance, but it wasn't just the judge who had given it to him, it was Marcus, too. If Marcus had not stepped forward that day, if he had not been willing to show kindness to a stranger in need, this moment would never have happened. But it wasn't just the man who had been saved who noticed the change. Something had shifted in the entire courtroom. People who had once dismissed Marcus, who had ignored him because he was just a kid from the grocery store, now saw him in a new light. They realized that his actions had changed everything. His kindness had made a difference, not just in one person's life, but in the lives of everyone in that room. As the applause died down, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find Judge Blackwell standing behind him. She smiled warmly at him, her eyes full of respect. "You did something today that not many people would have done," she said quietly. "You reminded us all that kindness can change the world, Marcus. Sometimes, it's the smallest actions that create the biggest impact." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never thought of it like that. To him, helping someone in need wasn't a big deal. It was just the right thing to do. But standing there in front of the judge, with all the eyes in the room on him, he began to realize that his small act of kindness had caused a ripple that was reaching far beyond what he could have ever imagined. Outside the courtroom, things were different now. As Marcus left the building, he noticed people looking at him in a way they hadn't before. People he didn't even know nodded at him as they passed by. He could hear snippets of conversations as he walked. "Did you hear about Marcus?" one person whispered. "He helped Judge Blackwell," another said. "He saved that man's life. He's a hero." Marcus shook his head, not understanding. Hero? He wasn't a hero. He was just someone who had done the right thing when it mattered. But as he walked, he realized that sometimes doing the right thing makes you more than just ordinary. It makes you someone people look up to. And it wasn't just the people in the courtroom who were changing their opinions about Marcus. As word spread, people in his neighborhood began to see him differently too. At first, they had all thought of him as just another face in the crowd, someone who worked at the grocery store, who didn't stand out. But now, they knew that Marcus was someone who had made a difference. He had helped someone in need when it seemed like no one else would. And that act of kindness had turned into something much bigger than anyone could have expected. Days passed, and things began to settle down. The man who had been given a second chance was slowly rebuilding his life. He found a job, he began making amends, and he worked hard to prove that he deserved the opportunity he had been given. Every time Marcus saw him, he would smile, knowing that he had helped give that man the chance to turn things around. But it wasn't just about the man. It was about the bigger picture. Marcus's actions had shown people that sometimes, justice wasn't just about following the rules. Sometimes, it was about seeing the humanity in everyone, even when it seemed impossible. And by showing kindness, Marcus had helped remind the world of that. The grocery store where Marcus worked also began to change. His manager, who had always seen him as just another employee, started to treat him with more respect. People from the community came in asking for him, asking for the boy who helped the judge. Soon, the store owner offered Marcus a promotion, recognizing that Marcus's heart and character were worth more than just a job in the back. Marcus, of course, was shocked, but he accepted with a humble smile. He had never worked to be noticed, but now that people were starting to see him for who he was, he didn't mind. And it wasn't just Marcus who had grown. Judge Blackwell had also changed. After the case, she started to look at every person who came before her in a new light. She remembered what Marcus had taught her, that every person, no matter their past, deserves a chance. She began to offer more second chances in her courtroom, allowing people the opportunity to rebuild their lives just as Marcus had helped do. She often thought back to that moment when she had called Marcus to the front of the room, and she smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes, a single act of kindness could change everything. For Marcus, life had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. But one thing remained the same: he would always choose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Because he knew now that even the smallest act of kindness could create ripples that spread out and change the world. He had seen it happen, and he knew that it was possible for anyone to make a difference. All it took was one good choice. As he looked out over his neighborhood, his friends, and the world he now saw with new eyes, Marcus realized something important. Justice wasn't always about following the rules. It was about seeing people for who they truly were, people who made mistakes, yes, but who were also capable of change. It was about offering second chances when they were deserved. And it was about kindness, above all else. And with that, Marcus smiled to himself. He knew his journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. But he was ready for whatever came next, because he knew that he had already made the world a little bit better. As Marcus walked out of that courtroom, his heart was full. The loud noise of the courtroom slowly faded behind him, and he stepped out into the quiet streets. It felt strange, almost like he was walking on air. The weight of what had just happened was starting to settle in his mind. Everything had changed, and it felt like the world was turning in a different direction. For a long time, Marcus had felt small. He wasn't anyone special. He worked at a grocery store. He lived in a neighborhood that wasn't perfect. He wasn't the smartest, or the strongest, or the one people paid attention to. People passed him by without noticing, and most of the time, he just kept his head down. He never thought that he could make a big difference. But today was different. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Just a few days ago, he had been just another face in the crowd. No one cared much about him. But now, people were looking at him in a new way. They were seeing him for the first time not because of the things he owned or the title he held, but because of what he had done. It wasn't the size of his heart that mattered, it was the way he showed it. That's what Marcus had learned. It wasn't about being the biggest or the most important person in the room. It wasn't about having all the power or all the answers. It was about showing kindness, doing the right thing, and caring for others when no one else would. That was what had made the difference. It wasn't the loudest voices that changed the world, it was the quiet ones, the ones who acted when no one was looking. As Marcus walked, he saw people passing by, going about their normal lives. Some of them looked busy, some looked tired. He wondered how many of them were like he had been, feeling invisible, feeling like their actions didn't matter. But now, he knew something important: every action mattered. Even the smallest thing could make a huge difference. The kindness he had shown to Judge Blackwell had turned into something bigger than he could have ever imagined. Sometimes, the quietest voices can make the biggest change, Marcus thought, as he paused to take in the world around him. He remembered how he had felt when he first helped Judge Blackwell. He hadn't known who she was. He hadn't known that his simple act of kindness would change her life, and the lives of so many others. All he had done was show up when someone needed help. And that was enough. Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He didn't want to be called a hero. He had just done what he thought was right. But as the days went on, he began to realize that sometimes being a hero wasn't about doing something big and loud. Sometimes, it was about doing something small, something quiet, when no one else was watching. And Marcus knew, deep down, that he hadn't just helped Judge Blackwell. He had helped himself. He had learned to believe in his own strength, to see his own worth. He had learned that his actions mattered, even when he didn't have much. As he walked further down the street, he saw kids playing in the park, laughing and shouting as they ran around. He thought about them and smiled. They were just kids, but they could make a difference too. They could change the world by being kind, by helping each other, by showing heart. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to wait until they grew up to start doing those things. They could start now. Marcus remembered how he had felt when he was younger. He had always wanted to be noticed, to be seen as important. But now, he understood something different. You didn't need a title or a lot of power to make an impact. What really mattered was how much heart you put into what you did. You didn't need to be the loudest person in the room to change the world. All you needed was the courage to do what was right. He stopped at the corner of the street and looked back at the courthouse. The building seemed so big, so important. But now, it didn't seem so scary. He had faced it, and he had stood up for what was right. And because of that, he had helped change a life. It wasn't the judge or the lawyer who had made that difference, it was him. In that moment, Marcus knew he was ready for whatever came next. He didn't know what the future held, but he didn't have to. He had already made a difference. He had already shown the world that even the smallest voice could create a ripple that could change everything. And that, he knew, was something no one could ever take away from him. As he kept walking, Marcus thought about all the things he could do in the future. He thought about the people he could help, the kindness he could show. And he knew that no matter how big or small his actions seemed, they mattered. Every small act of kindness could change someone's life, and who knew? Maybe it could even change the world. He wasn't the biggest, the strongest, or the richest person. But he was someone who had shown heart when it mattered most. And that was enough. The world wasn't always fair, but Marcus knew that kindness could make it a little bit better. And he was ready to keep showing kindness, every single day, no matter what. Because sometimes, the real power didn't lie in the things people could see. It lay in the moments when people least expected it. It lay in the quiet choices, the ones that didn't make noise but changed everything. And Marcus, with his quiet heart and strong spirit, was ready to keep making those choices.